Hi everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion, The Future of Work, How COVID-19 is Impacting Women's Careers. I'm Yumiko, and I'm an editor for the Wall Street Journal based in Singapore. I want to first thank the ESSEC Business School for hosting this event and giving us the opportunity to have a timely discussion on where things are for women and men's, really, careers since COVID hit 2 years ago. It's a great topic to be discussing now for Women's History Month. And I also would like the discussion to include a look at the future, namely, what are some of the changes happening in the workplace now that might have a more permanent impact? And what are some new skills that we all need to acquire as these changes take place? So before we start, some quick housekeeping rules. This session will be recorded and posted on the website for the school and the WSJ Plus page. And if you have questions for the panelists, please put that into the Q&A box and we'll get to them at a later time toward the end. So I first want to introduce our panelists. We have Aarti Ramaswami, who is the Deputy Dean of ESSEC Asia Pacific in Singapore. Aarti's work focuses on systems used to identify, select, and develop managerial and executive talent. And she is joining us today from Mumbai. Hi, Aarti.
Hi.
And next we have Stephenie, the Director, Organization Development, Culture, Employee Experiences at Eastspring Investments. And she is also an ESSEC alumni, class of 2015. Hi, Stephenie.
Hi, Yumiko. Thank you for having me here today.
Sure, great. And we have Natasha Khan, who is a reporter at the Wall Street Journal based in Hong Kong. And Natasha has been covering Hong Kong's zero COVID policy and the impact that's had on people's works and lives. Hi, Natasha.
Hi, and thank you so much, everyone, for having me today.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So I'd like to kick off by asking you all to give a short personal anecdote about working 2 years into COVID, and I'll give a quick start. So I actually moved from Hong Kong to Singapore last summer during COVID for my job. And people do say that when you're working remotely, it doesn't matter as much where you are. But I personally found that your work environment, like where physically you are, between Hong Kong and Singapore has changed so much, and it's had such an impact on how I do my job. So it made me realize that the location is still important, even if remote work is a big part of your life. And I'd like to start, first go to Aarti. What is your personal anecdote?
Great, thank you so much for that question, Yumiko, and for bringing us together, and for the teams at WSJ and at ESSEC Business School for having organized this event. What shall I say? The past 2 years certainly have changed the way in which we work, live, learn, travel, lead. And if there's anything that I keep from the past 2 years is the investment in those one-on-one conversations. And this is something that I used to do as a part of my leadership role. And it was very timely because I started to do that before COVID hit. And then it was one of the things that I realized was the best investments of the time as a manager, as a leader, because you continue to maintain that sense of connection, conversations. People are able to share a lot more than they probably would in a big meeting. So that's something that I'm going to take away with me from the past 2 years as a managerial practice, as a leadership practice, and to bring that also to the family to say, what kind of conversations do we need to have together one-on-one? What is work-life balance? What is your contribution? What is not working for you? And to create that space. It's not always easy, but you sort of learn along the way, and you get practiced, you get very skilled at doing that when you do that often. So that's my biggest takeaway, is to invest in those very crucial conversations and difficult conversations with family as well as with our colleagues.
Great, thank you for that. Stephenie, over to you.
Thanks, Yumiko. It's really nice to be here, right, to connect and also share our thoughts as we slowly emerge from this pandemic. Well, for me, 2 years working through COVID was what I call a dream come true, and also a reset button for myself as well, right? Why do I say this? I'm a working mom. I finally got to stay at home and spend a lot more time with the kids, which was very valuable to me. And as a career woman, I could eat my cake and have the best of both worlds, doing what I enjoy as a career and also balancing my family life as well. Something that I probably wished I could do, more of in the past, because, in the past, as you would appreciate, we spend a lot more time in the office. So it's very, very interesting, right? I could be cooking my boys pasta and taking a conference call at the same time.
I think we've all done that at one point or another.
Yeah, tell me about it, right? And I think what I really appreciated was because we don't have to commute to work. I could run in the mornings, but I also do concede it was a roller coaster ride, right? There were horrendous days as well where you have to give management presentation, and then your kid will be sneaking behind you, asking you to work out a math problem because he has to submit, his homework to his teachers. And of course, there's the endless household chores that, never really cease. But I think COVID was really a big reset for me because it really brought home to me what was really important. And I think it showed to me as a woman, right? It could change mindset and brought a lot of balance to what really mattered to me.
Great. Thank you for that anecdote. And over to you, Natasha.
Thanks, Yumiko. I think one of the things that I find that was quite striking in the last 2 years is how much I love the newsroom and being around my colleagues. I think covering the pandemic and developments in COVID in Hong Kong and around the region in the last 2 years, where a bulk of the time we were working from home, I realized, these few days, even though the pandemic situation is still not very stable in Hong Kong, I've been back in the office, and it's so nice to just have conversations with different colleagues that are here. And, I feel like that really feeds the work and makes the work richer, I guess, like having conversations that are more ad hoc, as Aarti was saying. Like, I think especially for our field where there's so much different information flowing in journalism, it's been I find interaction with colleagues even more precious than, obviously I always thought that, but now I really treasure that and realize how nice it is that we have that support of the Wall Street Journal newsroom and my colleagues here. So that's been something that this pandemic has really hit home for me.
Too quiet to be working by yourself, is it?
Yeah. Or when I work by myself.
Yeah, so thank you all for these anecdotes. We've covered a lot of ground there already in different aspects. I want to start off the conversation with a question for Aarti. As a management expert, I want to ask you, what is the biggest issue that you are looking at now? We've been 2 years into COVID. We've had a chance to maybe deal with the worst, and maybe now we're at a time when we can take a look back at the 2 years. We're getting used to some things. We're still not used to others, but it's not just, trying to deal with it day by day at this point, right? So what's the impact, the biggest issue that you're dealing with when it comes to career?
Thanks for that, Yumiko. This is one of those very broad questions that you can only answer with certain caveats and the boundaries within which you're going to look at this situation. And when I look at the pandemic, the past 2 years, certainly it has had a tremendous impact on both men as well as women. When we think about what are the challenges that are faced specifically by women, we can look at the impact on the economy, we can look at the impact on women's careers, as well as the impact on well-being. And one of the challenges that I think organizations and leaders and managers face, and they will end up facing by choice or by force, is how to give access to resources and the skills for people to be able to cope with it, what kind of organizational capabilities we can build as a team as well as individuals. We certainly see that around the world, more than 40% of the workforce is women, but there's more numbers compared to men who are getting out of the workforce. And this certainly has an impact on the careers with respect to how people are able to maintain a sense of employment, which is great for social stability and social connection, but also financial stability. And these cause stress, which has an impact on the well-being. And there is research and a lot of interviews and studies in the newspapers, as well as very systematic studies done to show that women end up taking more the brunt of managing the household. And we may not be in a situation where we are all very privileged institutionally or socially to have those support systems at home or in our organization or in our society that allows us to have that sense of balance. So at this moment, for me, as in all the roles that I play as a mother, as a leader, as a colleague, as a peer, as a friend, what are the ways in which I can continue to have those conversations that allow people to really get a grip on, get their arms around what has truly impacted you? What is it that you want to retain from those learnings? And how can we ensure that we can maintain that sense of stability with the agility that we need to continuously have? Because clearly, if anything, the last 2 years have taught us that nothing is permanent. And for me, that's the main lens to say, okay, how do we capture the learnings from the past 2 years? And how can we retain the ones that are best for us as individuals, for the teams, as well as for the organization? Because maybe not everything that we did in the past 2 years must be retained. And maybe there are some things that we did not do, but there's an opening for us to try and an openness to experiment with new ways of working, new ways of communicating, new ways of interacting. So that's been on my mind since, and it will continue to be on my mind, I imagine, in the coming months. Yeah.
So it's really taking stock of what's happened in the last 2 years and then really analyze it. So now is the time you think that we should be doing that. Great, thank you. Natasha, I want to go to you next on, we talked a little bit about Stephenie saying that staying home and juggling work and childcare was a great thing because you got to see more of your child, but Hong Kong is kind of an interesting place to look at. The trend is not the same as many other places in the world. Tell us what's going on in the ground, because it looks like the summer holidays are really happening in March, but people's movements are restricted with all the Omicron wave going on. What's going on there?
Yeah, so Hong Kong for the last year had managed to keep COVID away largely. So until late December, when several cases of Omicron really sort of leaked into the community. And since then, since about January 7th or 8th, the city has been in sort of a soft lockdown. I mean, in that many businesses have been ordered to close. Gyms are closed, for example, bars, restaurants were not allowed to dine in after 6 p.m. And unfortunately, those measures in January did not really work to contain the spread of the virus. And in fact, after Lunar New Year in early February, cases really climbed a lot. So, right now, the official tally is about 700,000 cases in the last 2 months. And, health experts estimate that number is really sort of vastly undercounted. As a consequence of those huge numbers, very sadly, the death rate has been going up a lot, mostly among unvaccinated elderly people. And one of the measures which has caused a lot of anger with families here in Hong Kong is that a decision to move the summer holiday from July and August to right now, so mid-March to April. So it's quite controversial. I mean, the idea of doing that was to commandeer a lot of the school campuses to use testing centers and potentially isolation centers. But after a number of assessments in recent weeks, the priority of the government has now shifted to really trying to stop the death rate from spiraling out of control. So in fact, there is no clarity as to when or if universal testing, like mandatory testing for the city, will happen. So, but what we do have as consequence of those policy announcements a few weeks ago is, the city's children basically all on summer holidays when many of the park facilities are closed. You're not allowed to go outside without a mask on, even if you're doing exercise. And it's, you know, a lot of angry families, of course, because first of all, they might be working from home, but now the kids don't have even school to occupy them. So they're having to sort of find activities for the kids, but there's not a lot of activities that are allowed or ongoing. So it is a very frustrating time, I think, for a lot of families in Hong Kong. And we can go into this a little bit more, but I guess one of the themes today is talking about the future of work. I think it is causing a lot of people to really question, you know, the short-term or long-term future of where they want to be based. Because I think, Aarti, you talked a lot about stability. And I think more than anything in Hong Kong the last few months, a lot of people are questioning the ability to have a stable life given these COVID restrictions. That, again, the bottom line, I think people are maybe okay with the idea of zero COVID, but I think the problem in the last few months has just been the erratic nature of the restrictions. You know, I think in some other financial centers, you've seen a clear path, whether people agree with that path or not. You know, at least there's clarity as to how things are going to proceed. While in Hong Kong, that's the thing people are thinking about. Like, suddenly you're announcing that schools are going to close, and then suddenly actually universal testing is not going to happen yet, you know, and there's just sort of, suddenly flights are not allowed. I was talking to somebody today who flew to the US to see his family in late December, and flights from the US have been banned since early January as one of the temporary measures put in place then. So now he has not been able to come back and might have to wait a few months. So I think the situation is tense. It's getting a bit better, as I said, but still, I think raises a lot of questions about work and, you know, like where somebody should be based and how that work-life balance should be in case of these issues.
So thank you, Natasha. So these are two polar opposites. On the one hand, there are a lot of people saying, okay, so we've dealt with the worst now. It's been 2 years now. What's the path forward? But one of the things we've got to remember is that this could change at any moment. And we could go into the uncertainties, living by, you know, day by day, trying to figure out what the restrictions or the policies are going to be next week, or how are kids going to go back to remote schooling again, and how are we going to juggle with that? I want to now go to Stephenie and ask, so you've been in this field of talent development for a while, and I want to get your sense of what are the needs of the workers that, you know, they are most vocal about. Is it the work-life balance? Is it the flexibility? Is it something else, or, you know, being heard? What are the needs that you've come across the most?
I think I can totally resonate with what Natasha has mentioned earlier, right? There are different needs for all walks of life. And I think what has come out a lot is really on mental well-being, right? On empowerment, and as well as on autonomy as well. And I think these are the themes that, you know, organizations are also grappling with. Now in Singapore, we've been through the spike, and then now it's you know, going a little bit more stable, and the society is actually moving into a more endemic state. But having said that, it is still what I call a cha-cha dance, right? You go forward and then you take 3 steps backwards. So it's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of organization policies. For example, management are deciding, should we bring the people back to the office? You know, should it be half-time, full-time? How does it really work? But I think the pandemic has showed us one thing that is really important, and I think the word is about empathy. The different people have different needs, whether it's caring for elderly parents, or even single, or even, you know, family with kids. Actually, it all boils back down to just one thing. At the end of the day, it is how we work. And at the end of the day, is how the organization creates work, right? That can create the structures for one to be effective at the workplace. And I think today's worldview is we have to think about the quality of work. And in order to get the best sales from people, I think at the end of the day, it's really about empowerment. So a lot of conversations now today, especially more so in HR fields, revolve around, you know, what, number one, what sort of flexibility do we give the workforce, right? and how can work be done in such a way that it still meets the needs of the organization, but yet on the other hand, empowers the person, right, to be flexible in how he or she comes to the workplace. I do appreciate that in some industry it is possible, but in others perhaps it is more difficult. So that brings, you know, a more difficult conversation is how do we find balance in this whole space. So I would say that flexibility and empowerment is probably the way to go in the future.
Okay. So that's really interesting from the career employees and the workers' point of view. And Aarti, can I also get your views on, you know, from the company standpoint, what does that look like? Now, we've written also in the Wall Street Journal about companies wanting to bring their workers back, but nobody wants to come back, or they want to choose, or from the company's point of view, where are they right now? Are they trying to figure it all out, or do they know what they want, but they can't enforce it, or what's going on there?
Yeah, what Stephenie just shared very much resonates with me, and oftentimes I say that people make the place, so it's really the people that is also the company. And yes, there is a management that has a certain vision and wants to decide on the policies and the structure and the constraints and the opportunities within which people are going to work. But I was writing in my notes over here, there's flexibility and there's visibility. And Stephenie noted empowerment, which is very much related to how are you going to find that agency to use the time. Certainly in the past 2 years, just to take a step back, we are contending with these questions because people have had the time to really think about how they spend time and how they spend time at work, how they spend time in non-work situations, whether it's with family, with their interests. There's also an increasing recognition on well-being and health, and what is that got to do with finding that balance. And we have had the time to think about it. We've had the time to practice some of that, whether by choice or otherwise. And now the companies are contending with these experiences of the workers, the employees and the colleagues, and to find ways in which we can move from the old way to a new way with that balance of flexibility. What does that even mean? Does it mean 4 days a week that you come in, or does it mean 2 days a week? Does it mean 3 days a week? And I think rather than getting granular about the number of days a person has to be in, I think organizations really need to start to think about how do we actually build trust? What is truly important for us to achieve this year, this quarter, in the next 5 or 10 years? What are the current ways of working that make sense for us? What is not working, and what will not sustain us, given the experiences of our colleagues with respect to wanting that flexibility, because the people want to come back, that is the truth. But they don't want to come back all the time. They want to have the ability to make a choice, or at least be given some flexibility to make a decision about when they want to show up, which also demands that we start to be more agile in the way we are communicating. We need more managers who are able to build that trust and manage remotely. And this is, if anything, one of the things that I've seen among colleagues in our organization, as well as other organizations, when I speak with managers or MDs and CEOs, is people have confronted a reality check on who they are, where their interests lie, and how they actually manage. And I don't want to dissociate the organization from the people. So these are individuals who are contending with these questions in the boardroom with respect to what is it? Do we need people to show up? Is that notion of presenteeism really important for us? And how can we find that balance with respect to how organizations can give agency, at the same time have a sense of binding people towards the vision and the goal? So it's not, free range way of working, but there is a certain collaborative structure. There's a certain expectation on the new norm. So I see organizations discussing those new norms of working, new norms of building trust, new norms of leading, not only leading in person, but also leading remotely. And if you don't see it, does it mean it doesn't happen? And these are very simple questions that managers are contending with. So if I don't see somebody at the desk, can I just trust that they're doing? And they may not openly say that, but that is one of the questions they oftentimes deal with. Can I trust my employees, my team, to get the things done without their presence on at their desk? And people are having that shift. So I see organizations trying to find and conversations with Stephenie, with other managers and leaders, is what is that, where do we move the slider for the flexibility? And can we be open enough to know that maybe that slider should move back and the slider can move forward? And to finding that flexibility in offering flexibility is also one of the difficult conversations that managers are preparing themselves, organizations are preparing themselves to have, because nothing is permanent, needs will evolve, needs will change. And can we continue to have the open mindset that when we are setting expectations, they are realistic expectations in the interest of employees, in the interest of the organization, and trusting each other to do that.
Stephenie, I want to ask you a question about when you say flexibility and empowering the people, what is it coming to in terms of, I don't know, men and women? Are there more women who want more flexibility that you've seen, or is it the same for men? Does it completely depend on the person? What is your experience?
Well, I think my experience is gender agnostic over here. And I think to what Aarti has actually mentioned, right? At the end of the day, it's really, what are the needs of the individual, right? Because I do think that men has their own challenges as well. But of course, right? I mean, in the past, there's always a social people that says that women rushes home, to care for the family, 9 to 6. But men stays behind and socialize after office hours, and they go to a pub, and that's where connections are built. But the question then, I mean, what resonated with me was what Aarti actually mentioned, right? In today's world, the whole remote managing is so real. As managers, how do you actually foster that environment to trust people, and to what extent, right? Where is the slider that you will give? So men and women apart, and I do see, especially more so the younger generation, they do appreciate that flexibility, right? And because and Aarti has really mentioned about it, right? She talked about the purpose of what work is all about, and I think people want to find value in what they do. So the question then for organization is really to think about, how do you job design? How do you job craft, right? To connect to the bigger picture of what the organization is trying to do. And I think that is something that we are still grappling with, especially in terms of fostering a wider corporate culture. But I think whether men, women, single or married, I think everyone is looking for flexibility in their own ways. And I think this is here to stay. And that is the reason why there's so many conversations around hybrid environment these days, and how much to empower, how much to give.
Thank you. Natasha, I want to go to you and your personal experience. I mean, you've talked about missing your colleagues, but then you sometimes have to work from home. On a personal level, how have you done it? And what's working for you?
I find that, I mean, one of the things that's been very helpful is having a very understanding boss. I mean, I think my editor has always been very aware of sometimes, I mean, as journalists and covering the stories that we've been covering for the last 2 years, sometimes is quite draining on mental health, which is something you guys have been mentioning. I think that's a huge issue, which I hope we will touch upon a bit more later. And he has always been really, he checks in and just makes sure that once in a while, if, it's particularly stressful few weeks, he makes sure that the people on the team takes a bit more time and just tries to dissociate from work. As journalists, and especially covering stories such as this one, like with COVID and some of the other stories that have been coming out of Hong Kong in the last 2 years, it's not uncommon that we'll work like several weekends in a row, like work late into the night, especially working with New York editors. So I found one of the things I'm really trying to do, but again, the disruptions have sort of sometimes interrupted my plans, is just to try to have more structure in the day, just try, even even there's much flexibility on sort of what time we're in the office, because a lot of times we do have to work with people in other time zones late into the night, just trying to be a bit more protective about my time in terms of, because otherwise, like, I could stay up really late and then wake up really late type of schedule, which is really quite bad. But I think that has been really helpful. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so nice to have a culture, as Stephenie is talking about, where you can be open about these things. I think having understanding colleagues, aside from the whole, obviously making work more pleasant point of view, it also is just very integral to making sure that you can be your best self when you're at work, because you're able to say, look, these are the issues. Like, I'm not able to sleep because we're often working with editors at all hours. So is there something we can do to address this? And of course, I'm very lucky, Yumiko and I are very lucky to work for a company that is really understanding about these things. But I do think a lot about the mental health disruptions that, one question maybe we can discuss at some point on this call is also just for you guys, Aarti and Stephenie, is it's great to work for companies where you can talk about mental health. But I wonder, in my reporting, when I talk to some people, obviously the sort of restrictions in Hong Kong have caused a lot of, a lot of pressure on people who, let's say, if they're sick or if they haven't been able to obtain a negative test, they're not allowed to go to work. And if they're not allowed to go to work, they're not paid. How do we, again, I know that leadership starts with good companies with good policies like that, but for such a big part of society, for such a big part of the workforce, their protections are just not there, right? Like, yes, there's labor laws for sick leave, things like that, but mental health seems, at least in Hong Kong, I don't know about in other parts of the region, I haven't seen strong mental health protection rules, but it's just something I've noticed more and more that is an emerging issue. And it's great to see big companies tackle this, talk about this openly, but how do we make that change, start that conversation as a society? Like, I wonder if you guys have thoughts on that.
Aarti, what do you think?
Great. Spot on. Natasha, we are at times talking from a vantage point, maybe sometimes from a position of privilege, maybe sometimes from a position of not fully understanding the myriad ways in which people have experienced this pandemic, as well as how that has impacted them in terms of financial, social, and mental health situations. Just speaking from being a dean of the school here, we have multiple stakeholders. We have students, we have faculty, we have alumni, we have our own colleagues. And if they are not well, we cannot function well as an organization. In this situation, what we have started to do actually here at ESSEC is to move away or move beyond awareness building to actually skill building in conversations about mental health, because this is something that people have not self-disclosed. It's hard enough for people to talk about their needs for training and skill building. Normal performance appraisal conversations are already difficult. And on top of that, you add something that has not been used to, they don't have the vocabulary, they may not have the posture that is needed, they may not have the trust. They may not know what it means to be confidential. And this is both ways for the person who is self-disclosing as well as the person who's listening would be like, oh my God, I'm not prepared to hear about depression, or I'm not prepared to hear about your work-life balance challenges. And what is the way in which they can show up in that conversation in the most authentic, considerate and caring way. And that takes practice, because this is a new expectation that we are beginning to have. It was assumed that managers would be able to have these conversations. And as Stephenie was sharing, one of the things I wrote down here in my notes is how are we observing, or are we observing any changes to the way in which we are writing job descriptions now? Are we using the same JDs for the same positions as we did 2 years ago to now? Yes, maybe some skills are different. You're going to add a few other KPIs. But what are the new demands that we are going to make of managers with respect to either managing remotely, or with respect to having conversational capabilities across cultures, being able to have difficult conversations around well-being and mental health? What are the values that they are now going to be living by? So certainly this is very important and crucial for us as a school, because we also have students who are dealing with this situation. We have faculty and staff who may have different challenges, teaching across countries, students waking up at 3 o'clock. This was 2 years ago, when we didn't have, we had the entry approvals. It was very difficult to get into Singapore at that time, but we've come a long way and we've learned. And which is why my focus is very much on what are we learning and what can we retain? What are we willing to change? What are we willing to train people on? What are the new investments that we need to make to ensure that the new colleagues, the new leaders and managers, our students, our staff, our faculty feel not only an intellectual understanding, but also internalizing those skills and capabilities to show up, to build trust, talking about these issues, and feeling that they belong and that they are cared for. This ultimately is going to be a differentiator in retention, along with flexibility. How flexible are you? What kind of culture do you have? How do you evaluate my work? Should I show up? Should I be showing my face all the time? Or can you trust that I'm able to produce the results while following a process that is understood and open in the organization? So I personally do think we are building that awareness about mental health challenges.
That's really interesting. That might be one of the more permanent changes,
Absolutely.
Even after COVID, that would become more important. And it's very interesting that you say that there needs to be training for both the managers to hear the conversation and the workers to disclose, and explain what they're going through.
Absolutely.
Is there anything like that, Stephenie, where you are, or have you come across this type of training that we're talking about here?
Well, there is, but I just wanted to also add, right? I think the topic of mental health, like what Natasha has said, it's really at this point of time a little bit undermined, right? And why do I say this, right? I was just having a conversation with my colleague the other day. We have an employee assistance program, but it is actually quite sad to see that a lot of people are not utilizing it, right? Most people actually see it as a taboo, in fact, to even call the hotline, right? And some of them may feel that, hey, HR is going to know what am I calling the hotlines for? It's a personal issue, or how would I be seen, right, in the organization if I were to call the hotlines? So I think that there is still a certain social stigma on how people view to talk about their personal problems. And I think we need to, have more conversations around it to normalize the entire. So if I draw the parallels between an executive coach, right, as well as a counselor, well, in my humble opinion, I think they probably do the same thing, although the issues are actually different. So how can we bring, the two, to almost be on par with one another so that people can speak up and people can be a little bit more confident and courageous to acknowledge that, hey, I am actually in a situation and I want to talk about it. And sometimes actually when you talk about it, it may not be as serious as it is, right? In the past, you go to the office, you turn a chair, there is a colleague beside you who can solve a problem. But today, you probably can't do it. You need to team someone, or wait for a reply through emails. So there will be alternative ways of how you reach out to people. And this is where organization can do a little bit more. And that's where the manager comes in. I'm so glad, Natasha, you have such a brilliant manager, right? I think the manager is really the glue of the organization, right? Because you foster the many cultures among the organization, but what's more important than these managers speak the language of what the organization wants to convey to the workforce. So I think the manager plays an important role, and there should be training for the managers. Well, my 2 cents is it's very difficult to be a manager these days. There's so many conversations to do, right? There's the performance, there's the feedback, and then you also have to take care of your own teams as well. And therefore, I think the organization will also need to do more to take care of our leaders, to train them well, so that they not only portray what is needed, but they can also take care of our workforce as well, right? And more importantly, we take care of what the managers do so that they can deliver what they need to do.
So skills, it's becoming more and more challenging, or the bar is higher for the managers going forward. That could be a permanent change. Thank you. I want to go to another kind of permanent change. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal just yesterday that I read about the hybrid work and how that affects women in particular. So the story said that women more than men are requesting flexible arrangements, and more women say that they will quit their jobs if they had to go back to the office 5 days a week, even if they didn't have another job lined up. So on the one hand, it's good for now, because that means more women are able to join the workforce in the first place because of the flexible arrangement. But what happens in the long run? Could they be isolating themselves from networking opportunities or career advancement opportunities because they're going to be at home, or they're going to be thought of as the people who want to be at home and not showing up? So Aarti, I want to go to you with this. What do you think of this story? Do you agree with the economists that are saying this, or not?
There is certainly some truth to that, but it is one of those things that I do feel we can come around as an organization, as a society. It relates to a lot of topics that we've shared in this conversation at this moment. And if I take a step back, I think of organizations not just as structures with roles and positions, and there are boxes and departments, of course, but to me, an organization is a network of conversations. And you will realize that there are some conversations that we invite people to, there are some conversations we exclude people from, there are some conversations that we don't want to have, there are some conversations that we often have, but we're not able to make headway. So getting a pulse on what is truly important for the organization with respect to the conversations that we are having, who we are including and who we are not, is going to shed some light into how we can make this flexible arrangement work for women. So how do we include them in conversations, whether they are working from home or working from the office? There is some research, there is some data that certainly shows that women are more likely to opt for a flexible work arrangement. Women are more likely to do that, especially if they have dependents and if they have children. At the same time, we also see the trend where men are taking the paternity leave. They enjoy that. They want to spend the time. So it's the shift is happening, but maybe at different, the trains are moving at different speeds, and they are certainly moving forward. But in this context, how can we find structures that allow for equitable participation, where not being present is not going to make you feel that you don't belong, that you're missing out on resources and information and opportunities, and to call out those challenges. Even with respect to mental health, we acknowledge that it is difficult to have this conversation. We acknowledge that people don't self-disclose. We acknowledge that this is a taboo. But by setting the context, we're saying, we know that this is difficult. We know that taking on a flexible arrangement, you might feel left out. You might feel that you're not a part of this conversation. Or maybe you don't know how to be plugged in. Maybe you don't have the technological resources. Maybe the net is not as simple as we don't have great internet connection. And so I'm not able to log in all the time to be a part of meetings. From the logistical aspect to the cultural aspect, if we start to put on the table the different challenges that people are likely to face and have that open conversation of how do we tackle each one of those? What are your needs? What can we do as an organization? Then we are being truly an open organization. We are creating that culture of very open conversations and including people in those important conversations, because otherwise it becomes a very top-down kind of a idea about, okay, this is what employees need. Maybe we provide this, which is efficient, which is great, as long as we know from the ground up. So finding the balance between the top down and the bottom up is an important challenge for I wouldn't call it a challenge. I would say it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to get the information from the ground up, sharing with them that you're just as vulnerable as they are, whether it's with respect to stress or work-life balance, and trying to see how you might cater to their needs. But of course, in all this, what is your North Star? Who are you serving? Is it the students' participation and the experience that they have, for example, at ESSEC? Is it their patients? Say, for example, you're in a pharmaceutical company. Who is your North Star? How can we serve them best? And what are the policies that we can put in place that allow us to manage that, the needs of the organization as well as your needs? So for me, it ultimately boils down to what are the conversations we are willing to have openly? Who is included in that conversation? Who is excluded from those conversations? And how can we make a change to make to keep our goal on the North Star and serve the purpose of the organization as best as we can?
So I guess just to summarize, what you're saying is that it could be avoided that women would lose out in the networking opportunities or the career advancement opportunities if companies become more inclusive or make it not as crucial to show up in the office and be visible.
Absolutely.
It could be done. How that's going to be done is yet to be determined, I suppose.
So I mean, my husband works for a tech company.
Okay.
The last time he went to the organization was, and even before COVID, was in 2019 to submit his reimbursements. Okay.
Okay.
So,
all right.
So this is the culture of the organization that allows that kind of flexibility. So they've been trained to work that way, so they don't feel that they're missing out. Now, if there's an organization that's never been like that, or they're learning in the past 2 years to do that, then you are contended with having that conversation as where do we move that slider? Do we change as an organization? What is our identity? And what kind of needs do we see new talent wanting? Will that continue to serve the purpose of this organization? Ultimately, it is having clarity on your North Star, having clarity on the purpose. It doesn't mean that you do a copy paste of what a tech company is doing or what a manufacturing company is doing, which is why I don't look at best practices, look at best principles and try to see what works for your organization. People may not like it, but there are trade-offs to be made. Are you willing to live with those trade-offs as an individual, a manager, and an organization?
Okay.
Yumiko, if I may make a point over here, just a very quick one. I think it'd be such a pity if we lose all the women just because they cannot, work flexibly.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It's such a pity. And I think women also needs to rebel against this as well, because after COVID, I do think that we need to redefine the rules of working in an organization. And this is the best time to do it. People have been working for the past 2 years and it has worked, right? I don't see that there is any reason why it hasn't worked for people. And I think COVID, in my opinion, has leveled the playing field for both men and women. Everyone, subject of course to the job nature, will all send home to work. So why is it that after post-pandemic, we cannot resume what is the best practice that we learn out of this whole environment, right? So I also think that, beyond conversations at the organization level, women will also need to, step up a little bit more and don't downplay ourselves. I think we need to, speak with a more conviction that this can be done. And at the end of the day, I mean, as women, we are perfectionists, we are all things to all men. We want to do a good job. And I think we will show to the organization and to people around that it is possible to juggle. Just give us the structure, the environment, and more importantly, have more awareness around conversations to help people become successful in the organization. I think that's the way to go. And it's not only just for women, right? It's also for young and old and all walks of life across the organization as well. So it's an opportunity for us to redefine the rules.
So more confidence, maybe, that the way you've been doing this at home, if it was at home, is something that they should continue with.
Exactly.
And not just during COVID. Interesting.
And
okay.
I don't think anyone should be really embarrassed by the fact that they are working from home. In fact, they're working longer hours even at home as well.
Okay. Stephenie, I want to ask you, switch topics for a little bit. And, COVID has been also called the great resignation era, and a lot of people switching jobs. Now, you have had a job switch during COVID. I don't know if it was related to any of this, but if, to the extent you can, take us through the process. What was it like to be working in a new environment when everything was so remote?
Well, I'm definitely one of those who contributed to the numbers in the Great Resignation. But let me clarify that, right? I did not do it because, I was frustrated by working at home or anything else. I mean, I spent 10 years in an organization and I just wanted, as a people developer, I always tell people, to plan and think about, what's the next steps in their career. And I think for me, it was just an opportunity that there was something that I could broaden my skill set, reinvent myself, and pivot. So it's just right smack, in the middle of COVID. So it was a good opportunity. But having said that, I'm also very grateful and very thankful, right? I joined at a time where people are very used to working through remote channels. And so it was quite easy to assimilate into the company because, you just set up a Zoom call, a Teams call, and you have great colleagues who make connections for you. So I think these little things really help you to, be part of the organization and feel belong as well. I always think it takes two hands to clap. On one hand, I also have to make deliberate effort to know, people in the organization. So I would ask
if it's a new organization.
Exactly. And also to know, the culture, their nuances, the team dynamics, know how people operate. But at the same time, I think in the organization itself, they have set up the architects in such a way, they do help people succeed, right? They make sure that they have, the policies, procedures, SOPs, right, to help you integrate into the organization. And largely people are more friendly. I would say because they all have their own challenges and they empathize with one another. So that's one of our core values as well, right? Empathy. And I thought that played out so nicely in my new organization.
Okay, all right. Now, looking forward, we're coming to some future, let's see. Natasha, I want to ask you if you were to, now you've done mentoring, you've been, I think you've been on both ends, right? So if there was a young student graduating from school right now, a female student that you had to give some advice to, what is one advice that you would give to a female student going into the workforce now, 2 years into COVID?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say one of the things that I think just don't wait for anything to get better, as in like put it off. Don't wait for, I actually taught a class of 20 female students who are semester like a few months ago. And I think that would be my lesson, maybe. Like for me, I feel that in the last 2 years, there's been times where I'm like, oh, maybe I'll just wait another month, maybe it'll get better. And then something else happens, and I think the mantra is, it's probably just going to be unstable, and just embrace the instability. And so I would say that would be what I would advise anyone going to the workforce now is, just seize those opportunities as you see them. Do what, follow your North Star, as Aarti said. What is it that inspires and drives you? And I think there are, embrace the new landscape, like maybe the hybrid way is probably the way that it's going to be for a while. And I think, not yearning for either one system might be the way, like be flexible and, as things are also flexible. Maybe that's what I would say.
Maybe also accept the hybrid way you think the hybrid way is going to continue for the foreseeable future, or at some point? Is that what we should expect, for the time being?
I would say, Stephenie and Aarti, perhaps you have more visibility on this, but it seems to me at least that, companies, let's say in Hong Kong, who are much more conservative in their sort of work from home attitudes in the last few months, as the COVID has worsened, has really allowed more employees to work from home. I think, as Stephenie, said earlier, COVID in some ways has really been such a leveling, factor in our lives that I do think that more people might demand that they have this hybrid model of work, and therefore force the change in the workplace. So I do think that that's here. Some form of it will be here to stay. That's my prediction. But journalists are infamously bad at predicting things. So that's my first.
Stephenie, what do you think? What would your advice be to a female student graduating now?
I totally resonate with what Natasha has mentioned, right? Seize the moment, but I will add in one more thing, correct? And that is really, the cognitive ability to make sense of what's happening, right? I think we live in a very, the term VUCA world is very volatile, right? It's very ambiguous. It's also very complex as well. And I have full of admiration of people graduating now. Because they have been through 2 years of remote studying and trying to make sense of what's happening in the world. They're so much more knowledgeable these days as well, and so much more confident. So bring that confidence into the workplace, and at the same time be able to then make sense of what is happening, take your knowledge, what you have learned, and be ready to adapt, and navigate and steer the future. That's the advice that I would give. At the end of the day, nothing actually is linear.
So be more confident about what you've accomplished in a remote setting, and try to adjust to the new hybrid environment, or do whatever the environment
is, whether it's hybrid or whether it's social, right? I mean, I have new interns coming to tell me, oh, such a pity, I've not met anyone in the office. And I said, you will, but in the meanwhile, let's just adjust to this new way of working, right? And we still get things done.
And do more Zoom calls or whatever, right?
Exactly.
So, yep. Okay. And Aarti, how about you? What is the advice that you would give?
Great. So what I'm going to share with you comes from the actual conversations with our students, our MBA students, our executive participants, and it touches on what Natasha and Stephenie shared, but I'm just going to put it in a different way, which is the framing of your experience, and looking back and looking ahead, coming to those conversations, coming to an interview, coming to a meeting with the mindset of what you have learned, to put not so much all the negativities that we have experienced. Certainly, it has not been easy. But it's not been uniquely easy just for you. It's been difficult for a lot of people. So in an interview, putting your experience with respect to framing the past 2 years as a fantastic opportunity for learning, how you might have built your resilience, how you might have had a different conversation, perhaps what opportunities you lost, and how you have navigated that balance for yourself with respect to your own personal needs, with respect to the needs that you're managing, or people who you might be dependent on. And oftentimes I have female executives and female MBA students and master students coming to me with, how do I manage this, right? And if I have a new opportunity, and my husband cannot change his job, or my partner cannot change his job, I don't see men asking me those questions in my office. The male students don't come to my office with the same challenges about balance as much as the female participants do. And I bring this out in the class to say, okay, guys, what's going on? What is it that's perhaps working in your mind, but you don't call it out? And let's call it out so that it becomes very normal to talk about these things. It becomes very normal to take it off. It becomes normal to have flexible work arrangements, not just for women, but also for men. And we should encourage men to do that much more, so that they don't create that bias or create that contrast. There exists a contrast right now because there's one group that's behaving differently, or they have different outcomes from that choice. And I had a friend who was telling me the other day, whether you're a student or whether you're an executive, whether you're a manager, wake up in the morning and tell yourself, girl, you're born ready. Okay, so stop questioning yourself, stop doubting yourself. Yes, you'll need to find a way. You will need to build the skills. You will need to figure out what it means to, you can't live in a bubble. You need to understand the business of your organization. You need to understand the financial aspects of your organization, the cultural aspects of your organization, so that you can talk and have the vocabulary that is confident, but stop doubting yourself with respect to what you can do and what you can't do. Tell yourself you're born ready, and then figure it out. And that just makes for a positive environment for you to start learning and filling the gaps that may exist in your situation. So that's been my experience in these conversations with our students, as well as our
really
interesting.
And some
of our alumni. Yeah,
how to have a different outlook, or just a different attitude. This is going to be it. I mean, all three of you have mentioned that, well, you got to get used to this ever-changing environment and sometimes changing radically. But if this is the new normal, then as you said, change the way you talk about it, how I build resilience, how I should seize the moment, how I should be more confident about what I've done already. So many learnings here. Now we have come to time, so we're going to have to come to a close, but I just wanted to thank all of you for such a great conversation. We've gone way beyond just talking about women and careers, but a different outlook and a different way of thinking and learning, living for everybody. So thank you so much for this, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, Yumiko, and Natasha and Stephenie as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.